Bulletin from the United Press. Flash, Washington, attack on Pearl Harbor.
After December 7th, 1941, the U.S. can no longer sit out the fight. That has consequences for domestic politics, and it makes Hoover and the FBI very nervous.
The Second World War had put the United States in an alliance with the Soviet Union, and the Bureau's fear was that American communists could use that and could therefore present their activities, their campaign, their agenda, as being patriotic, because it was all part of this large grand alliance. And part of that campaign occurred, from their perspective, in Hollywood.
So, in 1942, a campaign that started 20 years before with Charley Chaplin was quietly restarted. The FBI was actively on the lookout for communism in the motion picture industry. And it's right about this time that Chaplin makes himself the perfect target for Hoover. October 1942, Carnegie Hall, New York. Since the success of The Great Dictator, Chaplin had become increasingly engaged in the issue of the war in Europe. He was worried about Hitler and Nazism. He clearly did see those values as counter to his own. So, 10 months into America's war, Charley Chaplin found himself in a grand theater in New York City to support the American Committee for Russian War Relief. 3,000 people heard Charley Chaplin say, "Thank God for President Roosevelt," heard him praise the president for releasing a prominent communist leader from prison, and hailing his Russian comrades. Just about everything Chaplin said was in line with U.S. government policy. But to FBI investigators, the speech was more proof of Chaplin's unsavory, even un-American politics.
The press, particularly the more conservative elements, went wild. One columnist wrote, "Chaplin has lately said that he was pro-communist, which means only that he is anti-American."
The resulting FBI file on Charley Chaplin was 1,900 pages long. Within those pages are articles, correspondence, and interviews. There are also critiques of some of his movies, most notably featuring the little tramp who'd made him so famous. The character who'd kicked the immigration official's butt in The Immigrant was still causing a stir 20 years later.
Charley Chaplin's Russian war relief speech got him into hot water politically. And now, the gossip pages were about to play their part in bringing him down. He got back to his hotel after a successful night in front of the crowd at Carnegie Hall to a mound of messages. Joan Barry was staying nearby and wanted to see him. It was 2 weeks since Chaplin had bought her train ticket to New York. When Barry called again, Chaplin answered. She told him she just wanted to come up and say hello. He said yes. But he asked a friend who was staying in the suite with him not to leave them alone. Chaplin recalls the meeting took no more than half an hour before Barry left. Barry herself claimed the two had sex. As for the friend who wasn't supposed to leave them alone, he says Chaplin offered to drop Barry back at her hotel, and then he, the friend, went to bed, leaving them alone. And what happened that night between two consenting adults, we will never know for sure. But whatever happened would have consequences for Chaplin for the rest of his life. Two months later, on the night of the 23rd of December, a car pulls up at Chaplin's Los Angeles mansion late at night. A woman gets out of the car and, using a ladder, scales the wall of the house, breaking in through the window. Once inside, she produces a gun. This woman is Joan Barry. She later claims she bought the gun to kill herself. But whatever her intentions, Chaplin talks her down. His sons are in the next room.
When Barry shows up again a week later, he decides to call the police. Barry is given a 90-day suspended sentence for vagrancy and ordered to leave town. 6 months later, Barry returns. She's now pregnant and claims the unborn child is Charley Chaplin's. This time, she doesn't want her pregnancy to be a secret. She wants Chaplin to acknowledge that he is the father of the baby, and she doesn't care who knows it. Joan Barry turns to Hedda Hopper.
So when she gets wind of Joan Barry's situation, she gets her hands on Barry right away.
Hopper guides her, helps her, and promotes her side of the story.
So when she hears there's a woman who is, going after your grandfather and wanting him to, stay in a relationship with her, et cetera, she's onto it right away. And she publishes a piece saying, right from the beginning, this poor girl, 24 years old, this poor girl has been, basically abused by Chaplin.
Hopper's columns are sensational, but the crazy thing is that she wasn't just reporting on the story. She was as much part of the story.
She helps Barry initiate Barry's case against your grandfather for the paternity suit. So she's behind it all the way.
This is the point where things get pretty weird, where all the different threads come together. Charley Chaplin, Joan Barry, the gossip columnists, and the FBI.
Here's John Spartolati again.
At the moment when Chaplin is only facing the paternity trial, Hedda Hopper writes a column at one point where she says that Chaplin will soon have something much bigger to worry about.
How could she know this?
Hopper has a relationship with the FBI, is one of the press figures that Hoover occasionally leaks things to in order to smear people that he has a vendetta against for whatever reason.
As extraordinary as that might sound, it's true. Hedda Hopper, Hollywood gossip columnist, and J. Edgar Hoover, the FBI's all-powerful director, knew one another, and she knew his agents on the ground in Los Angeles. She would pass on Hollywood gossip to him, and he would supply her with information in return. So there is a chance that Hopper knew what was coming down the tracks for Chaplin, something far more serious than a paternity suit. The reason that he finds himself in a Los Angeles courthouse facing upwards of 2 decades in prison. It comes back to that train ticket.
I think there's a pretty long-standing antipathy on Hoover's part for Chaplin. And it's very clear to me that he's rather opportunistic in going after Chaplin, and that he'll work with the tools that he has. And the circumstances of Chaplin's affair with Barry and the fact that he paid for her to visit him in New York gives Hoover that opportunity.
Hoover directs his agents to open an investigation into a violation of something called the Mann Act, also known as the White Slave Traffic Act.
And the intent of the law was to counter prostitution, to counter sex trafficking. So it's a good law from that perspective, but the language was very loose. And what the law did was it forbade anyone from transporting women across interstate lines for immoral purposes. Well, that gave a great deal of elasticity for people who wanted to define immoral purposes as simply, for example, having sex out of marriage.
So, if Charley Chaplin had paid for Joan Barry's train ticket to New York, which he had, and then had what the Mann Act labeled immoral practices with her when he saw her, he could be in violation of the law. They were successful in building enough of the case that it resulted in a trial.
So if you can't prove communist membership, right, if you can't successfully attack him for his political views, but if you can tarnish his image on these sexual grounds and then at the same time remind people consistently of his political views, you accomplish maybe some of the same tactics.
Charley Chaplin's image would arguably never recover. It was later proved conclusively that Charley Chaplin was not and could not be the father of Joan Barry's baby. He took a blood test that showed a man with his blood type could not be the father of this child. And as for the Mann Act trial, by the time the jury retired to consider the verdict, Chaplin was pretty confident in the outcome.
But they take that much longer than he'd expected to reach their conclusion. Chaplin hadn't been allowed to leave the courthouse while the jury considered their verdict. Standing by the defendant's bench, he later wrote that his heart was thumping in his throat. But the verdict is not guilty.
The damage, though, has been done.
I think this is a sad story. Sad for my grandfather and sad for Joan Barry. But notwithstanding their personal turmoil, which I have great sympathy for, the part that concerns me most is that their private lives got dragged through the public arena to advance other people's political agendas. It's that both Barry and Chaplin were used by powerful, manipulative forces to generate public opinion. In 1947, in his office in the Department of Justice building in Washington, D.C., J. Edgar Hoover hears the news of Chaplin's acquittal. Now, a decision needed to be taken on what to do with the remaining charges against him.
Hoover decides the charges should be dropped. The last thing he wants to do is make a martyr of Charley Chaplin. But Hoover and his agents are convinced there is a case to be made against subversives in Hollywood. This is no time, he thinks, to start easing off. It's time to start ramping up. This is about to get much bigger than Charley Chaplin.
Hollywood Exiles is presented by me, Una Chaplin. Our producers are Glyn Tansley and Megan Jones. For previous and longer episodes, go to the Hollywood Exiles podcast at bbcworldservice.com/HollywoodExiles or search for the Hollywood Exiles podcast.